Hello viewers, this is Roundtable coming to you live in our studio headquarters here in Juba. My name is Mayiriam Yok. On today's edition, we will look at the role of RJMEC in ensuring that South Sudan's transit from conflict to democratic country through elections. The Reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission is constituted under Chapter 7 of the RSS and is responsible for monitoring and overseeing the implementation of the revitalized peace agreement and the mandate and the task of the Artigono, including the adherence of the parties to the agreed timeline and implementation schedules. My guest in the studio is a person of the great profile. Is Dr. Thomson Fontaine, is RJMEC Deputy Chief of Strategy for Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy. He is a former economist at International Monetary Fund, IMF. He is a university lecturer at the United States of America. He is a former senator in Dominican Parliament, one of the Caribbean countries in North America. He is also author of the book titles The Marathons of the Dominican 1764 and 1888, The Resistance, Revolution, and From the Slavery. That is a small biography about our guest, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy in RJMEC, is here in SSBC Roundtable, going to talk about the role of RJMEC in ensuring that South Sudan transit from the conflict to a democratic country through elections. Your Excellency, Doctor, you're most welcome to Roundtable.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you and to be with your many listeners.
I can say I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to host you for the first time on the Roundtable.
It's my pleasure.
Before we start on, can you tell us the mandate of the RJMEC in South Sudan? What is the mandate of RJMEC in South Sudan?
Okay, RJMEC, as you rightly indicated, is a creature of the peace agreement. From the very first peace agreement in 2015 to the most current 2018 peace agreement. Our role is to monitor, evaluate, and provide oversight to the peace agreement. That includes overseeing the roles and the tasks of the Government of National Unity. It also involves overseeing the tasks of the Parliament and all of the institutions that have been formed for that agreement, including, for example, the Joint Defense Board, the National Elections Commission, the Political Parties Council, all of the CITISAM that looks at the peace agreement or the violations of the peace agreement on the ground. All of that we are responsible for. In addition to that, we break deadlocks. If there are any difficulties between the parties to the agreement, we intervene to break those deadlocks. And importantly, we report to the government. We give them constant updates as to how they're doing, how our evaluation is going. We also report to the Parliament. But importantly, we report to the Africa Union Peace and Security Council. We also report on a regular basis to the United Nations Peace and Security Council and the UN Secretary General. That is all part of the arrangements that we do to ensure that the agreement proceeds as planned, and we effectively ensure that the agreement goes as it was intended to by basically interacting with the government, interacting with the Council of Ministers, interacting with the Parliament, everybody that has anything to do with the election, with the, not the elections only, but with the agreement. We interface with them, we speak with them, and that's how we get the agreement to move forward.
Your Excellency, coming to the roles of the RJMEC in South Sudan, because we talk about the mandate, but what roles do you foresee apart from your mandate?
Yeah, well, the important role for us is to ensure that the peace agreement is observed as is. The peace agreement, if you may recall, it took over 15 months of hard negotiating by the parties to come to some kind of agreement. So our role is to ensure that the parties stick to whatever it is that they signed up to. And that is, they signed up to transition in South Sudan from conflict, basically going on to elections at the end of the transitional period. So we view our role as being critical in ensuring that whatever it is that the parties decided that what they signed up on the dotted line to do, that they in fact do it. It's not an easy task, as you can well imagine, but it's something that we believe ultimately will result in sustainable peace in South Sudan.
Yeah, Doctor, let's come to the election matters. South Sudan is preparing to conduct its first general elections toward the end of 2024, which is December. According to the peace agreements, according to the roadmap, they are going to elections. Now they are in preparation, in the deep preparation. The parties, everybody feel like they are really going to the elections. Now, what can you say about the ongoing process of preparations?
Okay, that's a very good question, and that's the question that everybody is asking right now. But let me just explain to your viewers what the process was supposed to be and where we are. The whole peace agreement was centered around arriving at elections at the end of what we call the transitional period. During that period, we started with the formation of the unity government on the 20th of February 2020. The government was given 3 years to do a series of tasks that would take the country to elections. At the very center of those tasks were a permanent constitution that had to be derived for the country. But as you know, you have the transitional constitution that's currently in place and the peace agreement that governs the affairs of this country. But the government was supposed to arrive at a permanent constitution, number one. Number two, they were supposed to ensure that the forces were unified because obviously South Sudan coming out of conflict, you had different warring parties, you had different commanders-in-chiefs and so on. It was important to unify all of those warring forces under one commander-in-chief who would be the president. That was seen as very important because those unified forces are supposed to provide elections security. So these two very important tasks were supposed to be performed. And that is the reason why in July of 2022, when it became obvious that we had not done the permanent constitutions yet, we had started the process, but it had not really gone the way it was expected to. We had started the process of unification because the forces had been brought to cantonment sites and to training centers. Over 55,000 forces, including police, fire brigade, prison officers, military, had been trained and were graduated. The graduation ceremonies took place all of last year, over 55,000. But these forces needed to be redeployed. And the reason why you needed to redeploy these forces is because it was seen that if you're going to go into election, it is important to have a neutral force, as it were, on the ground, of police and military on the ground to look after elections-related security. So that's the reason why the unification was so very important. So any discussion about elections must take a close look at whether or not we've achieved those two important, what we call the prerequisites, the permanent constitution and the unification of forces. In addition to that, for elections, of course, you will need to know who is going to vote. You still have a number, over 4 million South Sudanese who are either in camps here within South Sudan or they are refugees overseas. So you need to have a discussion about how are they going to be part of that future of the country, how are they going to be part of this. The registration of those voters, that has to be done. You also have to set up committees. And also an important part of all of that as well was the National Elections Commission that was supposed to oversee, that is supposed to oversee the conduct of the elections. In other words, they're the ones that will be able to run, if you like, to run the elections, set up the voters list, set up the whole mechanisms and so on.
To cut it short,
Yes.
You talk about the unification of the process, which is the core mandate of the revitalized peace agreement for the country to go for free and fair elections. You also mentioned that about 52 or 53 Southern troops were taken to the cantonment area, were trained, graduated, but pending deployment. Recently, over 700 were deployed. Officers were deployed to Malakal, and few from police were deployed. Now, since we remain with the 10 months period for the election, and the unification process of the army is not yet complete. What can you say as RJMEC on that matter? And do you believe that this remaining process will be deployed in the short period of time?
That's a very good question, and the way I want to answer this is to kind of bring you back to when it all started. The unification of forces was supposed to be what we call a pre-transitional task. In other words, it was supposed to have been done in the first 8 months after the signing of the peace agreement. The peace agreement was signed on the 12th of September 2018, and in the first 8 months, you were supposed to have that unification, even before the formation of the government. That did not happen. It took a very long time to get us to where we are. And even now, with the graduation in what we call the phase 1, because we expect a phase 2, which will include even additional forces. The phase 1 was supposed to have been completed and the redeployment take place. Now, we have not yet seen that, and that's the reason why we continue to appeal as the monitors of this peace agreement. We continue to appeal to the government to ensure that this unification takes place, that these forces are in fact redeployed. Now, we've had some redeployment. About 4,700 troops have been redeployed to various places. You talked about the 700 police officers and so on, but we've not seen the widespread or wide-scale redeployment that we had hoped. And that obviously could have some implications for the election, because as I said, as a country coming out of conflict, it is absolutely necessary to guarantee security. That has to be a key part of the whole process. And we see the unified forces as playing a central role in that. You also have the issue of the civilian population that is awash in arms. As you know, South Sudan, you have a civilian population, and there is talk of a disarmament of the civilian population even before the election. That is something that the government has to be concerned about and is looking into. You recall that in December of last year, there was some within Juba, but that only took place within Juba. If you think of what's going on in different states, in Upper Nile, in Unity, in Pibon, in different areas around South Sudan, that also needs to be carried out to ensure a certain level of security. So that needs to be done. My fear is that given the time that we have, the 10 months, as you rightly indicated, is that it's not enough time, but I believe that a lot more can be done. In other words, the forces that already graduated can be redeployed. We can complete phase 2. We are told by the experts that we can do that within 3 months. We can have the training, because it's not like you're training new forces. These are persons who know how to handle a weapon.
It's about
getting them together. It's about helping them focus on country as against individual parties. So that kind of re-education can take place within, if you like, within 3 months. So we can see the completion of phase 2. I think the bigger question is the permanent constitution.
We will come to the permanent constitution.
Yes.
We will come for it.
Yes.
Now let me quote you very well. You talk of the refugees and IDPs to be part and parcel of the elections. And there's many says that say, if you flee to the foreign country, you are not be able to force to come back until voluntarily you feel that there is a peace. Should the refugees in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and all neighbors of South Sudan could be the setback for the election to conduct in case if they do not come back to South Sudan?
Well, that is an issue that the National Electoral Commission will have to look at. The agreement is very clear that consideration must be given to the refugees. And as you rightly indicated, they are refugees out of South Sudan. They can only come back voluntarily. So one could argue, well, they need to come back voluntarily, and it's only when they come back, then they can be a part of the process. Well, that is something that can be worked out. For example, is it possible to arrange the process within the camps? That is something, again, the Electoral Commission will need to look at. But I think it is very important in terms of inclusion, that you see what is the best way to include. Because it's about a third of the population, 4 million people. It's about a third of the population of South Sudan. So it is not insignificant. It's really a big number.
Let's come
of
to
individuals.
let's come to the political parties. Recently, there was code of conduct held last week in the hotels where the political parties council called for on political parties, which you yourself have attended, then they did not reach consensus on what the code of conduct should be, and some and others political environment for them, they have not reached consensus, and now it's 10 months ahead of elections. It's 10 months to go to elections. Now all the key pending issues, pending tasks remain incomplete. Do you believe that the election will be conducted on December? Do you really believe that?
The timing is not for us to determine. That is something I said, it's clearly within the mandate of the National Electoral Commission. They have a certain, if you like, checklist that they have to go through, and they will make that determination together with the political parties. As you mentioned, the political parties, about 2 months ago, when it became very clear to RJMEC that the agreement was not going as planned, that the implementation was not going as planned, and they have only less than a year to elections, our chairperson, General Charles Tai Getwai, wrote to the parties, to all of the parties, including the president, including the first vice president. He wrote to them and basically said that the parties needed to dialogue. They needed to come together and decide and agree on how to move forward, what is the best way to move forward. That party dialogue has been initiated, and the expectation is that the parties will then decide how best to move ahead. The task that they have to do is very clear, according to the agreement. It is well laid out in the agreement. But if you're going to conduct elections, there are other issues. You've heard, for example, people talk about the question of a census, the registration. You heard as well that the National Electoral Commission said they're going to begin the registration in June. Now the question is, can you do registration in that 6 months, when it's supposed to take at least 6 months of registration? Will you be able to do enough to register everybody and then still hold the elections? All right, the party dialogue will have to resolve those kinds of issues, because what it is that all the parties who are party to the agreement, and let me just make that distinction between the parties to the agreement and all the other parties. There were 5 parties to the agreement. There are 5 parties who signed the agreement. And this is the SPLM of President Salva Kiir. There is the SPLM-IO of the first Vice President Riek Machar. There is this SOA, South Sudan Opposition Alliance, that is a combination of 8 political parties that is under the chairmanship of Mrs. Jennifer Lago, the Minister of Agriculture. Then there is the former detainees as their own group. And then the other political parties, the OPP, is a loose, again, organization of some 6 political parties. These are the official parties to the agreement. But one can expect, as we move forward to election, other parties will come on board. In fact, there are already 14 parties that have been registered through the Political Parties Council that are not necessarily those parties that I mentioned. Okay, so we say that there are a number of parties within South Sudan, but the discussion is, for the time being, around elections concerns the parties to the agreement, since they're the ones who signed and they're the ones that have the responsibility of taking the country to elections. So those discussions will happen.
Doctor, let's come to the permanent constitutions. Permanent constitution is a key for lasting peace, lasting stability, and peaceful transition and a good governance. For you to have a good governance, you must have a constitution that guides you on what to do, what not to do, and here is the directions. What could be your advocacy as an RJMEC, as an expert on the permanent constitution for South Sudan to have a good governance, stability, and peaceful coexistence among its citizens?
You know, having followed this issue even during the negotiations, the issue of the constitution was one of those things that actually almost derailed, almost caused us not to have an agreement, because there was so much disagreement over it. At the end, the way it was resolved is to tell the parties, okay, the parties agreed that they were not able to resolve those issues during the negotiations, but that would form a central part in the first, in fact, in the first 2 years of the transitional government. That task was supposed to have been completed. There's a very important reason for this. The Constitution as it is, the 2013 Constitution, the 2011 Constitution as amended, was viewed as one of the, if you like, one of the triggers of the conflict. in the sense that the feeling was that a lot of the powers were concentrated within Juba and that the states felt they did not have enough power. So within the peace agreement, it was agreed that there will be a decentralization of power, possibly through a federal system of government, so that all of the states feel that they have a stake and ownership in the country. So that was a very important point that was laid out in the peace agreement that all the parties agreed to. Therefore, the constitution becomes critical in the sense that it has to address that particular issue. And that's the reason why it was a prerequisite to the holding of elections. So what I can say about this is that now that the the Constitutional Review Commission has been reconstituted, it now involves all of the parties to the agreement. It has been given some resources by the government, I'm told, so that they can do civic education and do what they have to do. It is possible that this constitution can be done, but there will be a certain amount of time that's required to do it. Again, the parties can agree, and the parties should agree how much time is required and how much time do we need for that to be done. But it's very important that that prerequisite be observed because, as I said, there was a reason why it was a prerequisite, and it was viewed as being critical in ensuring lasting peace. If you have a political constitution that all of South Sudan signs up to, all of the country agrees to, it is a lot better foundation for lasting peace than one where there were disagreements and so on. So that is
Dr. Thomson, let's go for a short break. When we come back, we will look at other issues. Stay tuned, our viewers. We will be right back shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back from that short break. You're still watching Roundtable coming to you at SSBC, your national broadcasting in capital Juba. My name is Mayuriam Yok, and to remind you, as my guest in the studio is none rather than Dr. Thomson Fontaine, which is the RJMEC Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, and we are talking of the role of RJMEC in ensuring that South Sudan transit from conflicts to democratic countries through elections. Doctor, you are most welcome from that break.
Thank you.
Doctor, as we are discussing now, let's look at how will Artigino and parties to the agreements be able to complete the critical pending issues and create a conducive environment for the conduct of credible election within the time left.
Yeah, so that's where the dialogue comes in, and that's why the dialogue is very important, because it is up to the parties to agree. You know, and we've done that before. I mean, I can think of at least 3 different times when we had to bring the parties together during the course of the 6-7 years, bring the parties together to actually agree on certain things. And so this is not unusual. The responsibility for implementing the peace agreement rests squarely on the part of the parties through the unity government. And so the fact that they're willing to talk and to dialogue is very important, and they can decide on those issues. For example, when they met in July of 2022, they agreed that they needed an extension of 2 years to do certain tasks. The unfortunate thing about this is that they did not do as they promised to do, because those 2 years they were supposed to complete the unification of forces, they were supposed to complete the constitution, they were supposed to start the voter process, so none of that was done. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, if they did not do it the first time, will they do it a second time? As monitors, what we have insisted on and what we have really counseled or spoken to the government about is the need to fund the process, because one of the major challenges that we've had with the peace process is the lack of funding. And so we've been constantly encouraging the government to fund the process. We have been encouraged that in February of this year, the Cabinet of Ministers approved the budgets of the Electoral Commission, of the Review Commission, and of the Political Parties Council, the 3 critical mechanisms that have to do the constitution and the elections. that budget is supposed to go before Parliament. So there is an understanding that this budget needs to be funded to provide the necessary resources that the party that they need to conduct the election. So a simple answer to your question is it is possible given the resources and given the will to move forward.
Thank you. Let's come to democratizations, which is never an easy process. To be a democratic country, to be democratized from conflict is not an easy process. And this is particularly true in post-conflict settings, because South Sudan is a country in the post-conflict setting. 21 years of independence, we struggle to be a country from our neighbor North Sudan, which is currently Sudan, and again another 10 years of the internal conflicts that we are now ending, which is currently that this government ends. In line to your mandate, what recommendation can you tell to South Sudan is to learn from, because you're here to you are mandated to ensure that South Sudan is a country stabilized with the peace?
You know, one thing I've learned throughout that process is the need for patience and compromise. You know, these are the two things I think that are very critical in this. I know that the Republic of South Sudan, they're long suffering. Now we have the added problems of the economy and the high prices and so on. So it's a country that has suffered a lot. But at the end of the day, the peace agreement was meant to prevent a return to conflict. It has succeeded so far since 2018. What you do not want to do is anything that would take the country back to conflict. So you've seen how over the period Juba has improved, has developed. You've seen signs of activity, economic activity, buoyancy. Even in the states, I've had the privilege of being out in the various states. I've seen some activity happening. So there are certain dividends, if you like, that comes from having peace and stability. And the country has begun to enjoy that. What we do not want to do is for the country to go back to conflict. And that's why it's important that the people of South Sudan remain patient. Peace is something that takes time. Bear in mind, just 8 years ago, the country was involved. The people had their guns pointed at each other. They were fighting each other. We've moved away from that. And the further you move away from that period of 2013, 2016, is the better it gets. So it's about building. It's about building on that foundation. It's about building that trust between the parties. And that is why it's very important that the parties continue that dialogue. They continue to understand that they need to resolve their differences, not through the gun, but through dialogue, through conversation, through putting the best interests of the country first. And I think the people of South Sudan needs to be supportive in that they need to be patient. If, for example, the parties decide that they want elections and they're able to do it in the time left, they need to support it. If the parties decide that we don't have enough time, we need extra time, that too needs to be supported. But let the government, which is charged with this, discuss and come up with the best way forward, and then they get the support of the public. And that's very important, because for that to work, you need the support of the public. There are many countries across the globe that were once conflict countries that are now flourishing. And that is the place that I want to see South Sudan. I believe given the resources that are in this country, given the human resource, given the natural resources that are there, this country can really flourish. It can be a real symbol of peace and prosperity in this part of Africa.
Good. Now let's come to the National Election Commission announced in a press conference on Tuesday that the commission received some funds to conduct free activities, and they also mentioned that the voters registration will begin or will start by June this year. And now the political parties haven't yet agreed on whether the election will continue or they will extend the agreement, the roadmap. What can be your take on that?
Well, the NEC is doing the right thing. Their job is to prepare for elections. It is not their job to necessarily determine when that is going to be coming out of that dialogue, but their job is to prepare. So what they have said, they are going to start the civic education, they're going to start the registration. These are things that they need to do whenever the elections are called. So it's good to say that they have started. It is good to see that they have received some funding. That's about less than 10% of the budget that they've put forward to run the elections. But the fact that they are doing that is a good sign. And I think also it also opens the way as well for the international community to step in and to provide some assistance as well in the process of election. So it's good that they're preparing, and that must be done. You know, you must have the registration. You must set up the councils in the various states that will supervise the elections. You must begin the discussion about ballot boxes, about the process itself, about security. All of those discussions must take place even while the parties are talking and dialoguing about what date they're going to have the elections.
We have come to the end of our today discussions. That is Thomson Fontaine, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy in RJMEC, talking to you roundtable. My name is Mayiriam Yok, and on behalf of the technical team, I can say bye-bye and continue with the rest of the program coming up. Stay tuned. Pleasure. Pleasure.